I venture into my presentation, I would like to congratulate you on your appointment as Speaker of this illustrious House. I wish you a speedy recovery from the COVID-19 virus, and I wish you the very best in your future endeavors in here. I would like to congratulate our Amerindian brother, Mr. Lennox Schumann, on his elections as Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. This is significant since we are celebrating Amerindian Heritage Month. What an excellent way to respect and recognize our first people. I would also like to congratulate all our newly appointed parliamentarians and wish them well as they represent their constituencies through this highest decision-making body. Mr. Speaker, I stand here as a proud PPPC Member of Parliament representing the women through the Women's Progressive Organization. I stand proud because our women voted solidly for the People's Progressive Party Civic to once again lead this country because they know that with the PPP Civic in government, life was easier and will once again become easier. Mr. Speaker, I am a proud mother whose son, Dr. Michael Veerasammy, trained in Cuba, a Jagdeo scholar. When asked, he left willingly to work on the front lines in the war against the global pandemic, COVID-19. He was sent to a community called Eterinbang in Region 7. But Mr. Speaker, when he went there on April 21st, 2020, the situation he found was most unwelcoming. Can you believe that he wasn't even given something as basic as Panadol tablets to give his patients? Let me don't even tell you about his living and working conditions in that remote corner of our country. That is the reality that some of our young doctors face on the front line. He is still there because of my encouragement. Mr. Speaker, I was advised that sometimes the coronavirus takes up to 14 days for the symptoms to show up. Mr. Speaker, under the APNU AFC, there was limited to no testing done. By the time the PPP Civic government took over, COVID-19 had already spread all across Guyana. But guess what, sir? No trace of testing was done to ascertain the truth behind the massive spread. Now that testing is being done on almost everyone, it is exposing the mismanagement of the APNU AFC COVID-19 political task force that was made up of their members and politicians. Mr. Speaker, this virus did not increase under the PPP Civic, as it is made out to be. This pandemic was already there in our society. And as testing continues, it is revealing the true picture of the spread of the pandemic in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 is our business. It can affect any of us at any time. We have to continue with the aggressive testing of our people and enforce the COVID-19 restrictions, while encouraging through actions our people to take all the necessary precautions to ward off this most serious virus that has the capacity to hurt all of us. Mr. Speaker, allow me at this time to congratulate Bishop Juan Ejil, Minister of Public Infrastructure, for presenting, in my estimation, a people-oriented budget, one that has something for every Guyanese with standing occupation, gender, race, class, or geography. I would also like to thank the staff of the Ministry of Finance for their hard work in helping to prepare Budget 2020. Mr. Speaker, before I go further into my presentation, I would like to commend our young, dynamic, and thoughtful President, His Excellency, Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali. Just weeks after taking his oath of office, he has begun to deliver on his elections campaign promises. Mr. Speaker, if one has the aptitude to assimilate, then one can easily recognize that Budget 2020 is for all of us. Mr. Speaker, on the 26th of February 2016, I took my oath in this National Assembly as a Member of Parliament. It's a day I could never forget It started off as one of the most rewarding days of my life, to be given the opportunity to serve my country at its highest level. Unfortunately, sir, that day was marred by the events that followed. That day, sir, APNU AFC government imposed several tax measures on our people to further bleed their already empty pockets. Mr. Speaker, I worked fervently with my party and colleagues for a day like 9th of September 2020. Today, I can say to our people with pride that our plan for prosperity have begun a journey that will change your lives and that of your families for a better Guyana in the years to come. Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC did have large budgets, but they were grossly disappointing and did nothing to improve the quality of people's lives nor encourage growth and development for our country. One of my colleague MP said earlier that Guyanese lived in fear, wondering what the next APNU AFC budget would have taken away from them. Mr. Speaker, those days are gone. Guyanese can now look forward to a better quality of life under the PPP civic government in the real sense, not the promise of the good life, but indeed promises that we will keep to ensure that your lives get better. Mr. Speaker, in my 2019 budget presentation, I requested the Minister of Finance to take his budget back to the drawing board to include women content to it. In turn, I was rudely asked by one of APNU AFC former Minister of Government, who are you to make such a request? Mr. Speaker, I am one of the people's representatives in this honorable House. I have the right to make my observations known. My observations were objective. I criticized and I made recommendations. Mr. Speaker, the PPP civic government knows that women make up more than half of our population. And as such, 2020 budget allocations has begun the journey that will allow wives, mothers, and single parents, the vulnerable and the underprivileged, to have more disposable income in their pockets to improve their lives and conditions of living. Mr. Speaker, recognizing women's worth is valuing creation. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Joe Hamilton, Minister of Labor, already outlined in his presentation some of the programs that will be offered by the Board of Industrial Training to provide skills, retrain, and to make our women competitive in this age of science and technology to meet the demands of our new petroleum economy. Mr. Speaker, the Guyana Women's Leadership Institute is very dear to my heart. The huge capacity of this institution was underused and misused for the benefit of a selective few across Guyana. GWLI was the first institution of its kind to be established in the Caribbean for women to be trained and take up leadership roles in our society at all levels, for them to influence decisions that affect their lives, and for them to become economically and financially independent. Mr. Speaker, the PPP civic government do not pay lip service to women. We have known to talk the talk and walk the talk. For some of the most modern legislation, we have instituted some of the most modern legislation to protect women. The PPP civic government established the National Commission on Women, which give way to the Constitutional Commission on Women and Gender Equality. From a paper on women, the PPP Civic developed a policy on women. From women who couldn't get a loan to start business to the Women of Work program. And because of its understanding of poverty, the difficult circumstances unit was established to help women, and not only women, but men, who find themselves in dire circumstances and need financial support. And there is so much more I can go on and on, but time will not permit me. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the PPP civic government achieved the Millennium Development Goal of providing potable water to Guyanese. This budget will start the process of ensuring that families get treated water from their taps. When women don't have to spend money to buy bottled water, they can save monies to buy essentials. There was a time in Guyana under the PNC 28 years of dictatorship when women spent hours fetching water from far off places or pay hefty sums for a black tank of water. Now women can turn their taps on and get water because this way women can spend quality time with their children. PPPC made that possible long before APNU took government in 2015. Mr. Speaker, vision precedes the transformation. When policymakers understand people's pain and suffering, they will work long and hard beyond the call of duty to transform the society to benefit all. That is what this young, energetic, dynamic team of PPP civic ministers of government and MPs will be doing in the next 5 years and beyond. We are not here to use divisive methods to divide this nation. We are here to build a country for all to benefit. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC members over the last 5 days, have been beating down the budget, claiming that it's a private sector budget. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, due to poor or no policies, several businesses shut their doors on thousands of workers, while others cut back on the numbers in their employment. What was worse, Mr. Speaker, was their poor negotiation skills for the workers' benefits. Can you remember the teachers' strike? More than that, sir, was the callous manner in which APNU AFC, after promising that sugar was too big to fail, closed the sugar estates in contradiction to the findings of a study they themselves had undertaken. They fired thousands of workers in the most vengeful manner without a backward glance to check if those families were starving, surviving, or if their children were going to school. Mr. Speaker, I am blessed to be part of a process that will see the reopening of sugar estates at Enmore, Rose Hall, and Skeldon. What is more heartening, sir, is the work that has commenced already by the newly established Whale Development Authority to create opportunities and employment for more than 1,600 workers who were fired by APNU AFC in January 2016. Mr. Speaker, families of sugar workers are now hopeful that their future are no longer looking bleak. They are hopeful for a future where they can put food on their tables and send their children to school. Their tears have turned into smiles. For some of those sugar workers, I would like to remind us how, that some of those sugar workers voted APNU into government in 2015 based on the promises they had made. Mr. Speaker, those very people voted them out in 2020. Mr. Speaker, the incentives identified in this budget will encourage business to reopen its doors, which in turn will stimulate economic growth and prosperity. Indeed, the private sector is the engine of growth. The private sector, as it grows, will provide more jobs for our people. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member Cathy Hughes said that she hoped that putting monies into the sugar estates is not putting it into a black hole. I remember those very words from the former Minister of Finance, Winston Jordan. Well, I would like to say that sugar grew tens of thousands of Guyanese into the men and women they are today. I would like to remind my colleague that sugar was one of the largest foreign exchange earners, and given the right impetus, the right guidance, and enough financial support, sugar will once again become a viable entity. Mr. Speaker, the PPP Civic is the only government to do it, and we will work hard to make production competitive while all Guyana will benefit. Mr. Speaker, aspiring homeowners, especially young people, were left with empty dreams, not knowing if they could ever be able to access a plot of land to build their dream homes. The previous government shut down the Ministry of Housing. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 outlined government's commitment to ensuring that over the next 5 years, 50,000 house lots would be made available to Guyanese. This is what we call promise kept for dreams to be fulfilled. More so, VAT has been removed from construction materials. This, Mr. Speaker, is one of the single largest employment sector of our economy, one of the ways through which 50,000 jobs definitely will be created. Monies used to pay rent in the past will now use to pay loans of new homeowners. Mr. Speaker, the 21st century brought with it new ideas, innovations, and aspirations. Everyone dreams of becoming the owner of a motor vehicle to take their families out in comfort. Over the past years, Guyanese lamented their frustrations over the imposed age on imported vehicles. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 reversed this draconian requirement, which brought smiles on the faces of aspiring car owners. And you say this is not a people's budget? When I think about the poor, the vulnerable, and the unemployed, I feel encouraged. When I think about the pensioners whose subsidies was removed and were forced to pay VAT on their utilities, I remembered my disgust. Mr. Speaker, our pensioners have the right to live their old age with dignity. This budget will allow pensioners to save more money to spend on things they need. I also feel relieved knowing that steps are being taken by the Minister of Human Services and Social Security to ensure that they receive their pensions at home or in their immediate communities without the stress of long lines in rain and sun at the post office amidst COVID-19 virus. Mr. Speaker, to be part of history in the making is indeed a great feeling. I would like to commend the PPP civic government for the well thought out measures proposed to bring immediate relief to our people's lives. And our plan for prosperity has begun. The PPP civic
Honorable member,
government.
our push off for time will require you to get 5 minutes to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her speech.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable member, you may continue to your conclusion in 5 minutes.
Thank you. The PPP civic government reversed some of the draconian taxes imposed to what they were prior to 2015, especially for the farmers and the miners, including land tax and fees at the MMA. It removed VAT from drugs, medical supplies, and educational items. It reinstated and increased the cash grants for our children. It doubled the uniform vouchers for our school children, and it granted free water to our elders, plus removed VAT from electricity and water. Mr. Speaker, and there are so many more other bold measures taken that are simply there to fulfill our promise to the people. It is all in our manifesto, which is a 5-year macro plan for our country's prosperity. Mr. Speaker, some are saying that this budget hasn't given enough as promised, while others said it is not pro-poor. I would like to remind this August House that this is an emergency budget, one that should have been tabled as early as March if the massive attempt at rigging the March 2nd, 2020 elections hadn't taken place. An earlier budget would have prevented the APNU AFC from squandering approximately $164 billion, which had to be covered in this budget. You want to know why our people weren't given more in this budget? It's because taxpayers' money was spent as if it was taken out of people's pockets. Mr. Speaker, domestic and gender-based violence remain a serious problem that affects each and every one of us. We are surrounded by perpetrators of violence and the victims of violence. Many attempts were made in the past to reduce this scourge in our society, and even though there is a zero tolerance policy regarding domestic and gender-based violence, it continues in our midst and around us by the very people we know. Government has taken steps to enhance the physical infrastructure at all police stations where men and women who are victims and even perpetrators can go and speak about their situation and seek redress. This is a program that started about 2 decades ago. Mr. Speaker, for more than a year, the Spotlight Initiative team has been meeting, consulting, and putting together a plan of action for Guyana to find solutions and provide rehabilitation to victims and perpetrators of gender-based violence. I have been fortunate to have attended several of those meetings, Mr. Speaker. 4.5 million euros support from the EU, UN partners to fight domestic and gender-based violence in Guyana deserve our gratitude. Domestic violence and gender-based violence is our problem. Together, we have to stand up against it. Mr. Speaker, we all need to work together as leaders against the following: to end COVID-19 global pandemic in Guyana, to eradicate racism and racial discord among our people, to reduce and eliminate domestic and gender-based violence from our society, to further reduce and eliminate poverty. Mr. Speaker, we all have the golden opportunity to work together to build a society that future generations can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, the PPP civic policies are definitely different from that of APNU AFC. We do not believe in giving with one hand and take it away with another hand. Mr. Speaker, the former government must be commended for raising salaries year after year. But Mr. Speaker, what followed the increase in salary was the more than 200 taxes and fees that operated like a silent thief in the night. Every opposition member in this House since Monday has been chanting one mantra: that budget 2020 is pro-sector, pro-private sector, and not pro-poor. That it is all gloom and doom. So, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for our brothers and sisters on the opposite side. I want to know if APNU AFC leaders are telling its supporters to refuse the benefits coming their way from the 2020 budget. I want to know if you're telling your supporters not to accept the $25 COVID relief. I want to know if you are telling the parents of your supporters not to accept the $15,000 cash grant plus the $4,000 uniform voucher. Mr. Speaker, I would like to therefore say to our brothers and sisters, Guyanese brothers and sisters, your PPP government prepared budget 2020 with you in mind. The endless benefits outlined will directly and indirectly enhance your lives. So don't listen to the voice of doom. Follow President Irfan Ali's government as it takes you into a future where there will be only progress and prosperity. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend this budget for this House's approval. I thank you, sir.